Randy Thom, thank you for joining us. So I was looking at your credits for How to Train Your Dragon 2, and you're listed about three times on there. You are the supervising sound designer, the supervising sound editor, one of the sound re-recording mixers, and one of the things you're not credited as being is the voice of Toothless, the dragon.
Okay, I
Uh,
actually did get a screen credit for it, but
you did, yes, that's right. Yeah. So does that mean you're eligible for a Best Supporting Actor nomination,
I
or?
sure hope so.
uh, so why don't you walk us through what those jobs entail? Because I think that a lot of people, when they think of sound in a movie, they probably just assume it's all basically recorded on the set. But you, of course, have many different intricate jobs that you have to do with sound, and on this one you did three. Can you
Yeah,
talk about each one of them?
sure. Well, first, it would be very hard to record sound on the set of an animated film. I'm not sure how you would do that, but there must be a way that you could use some technology to do that. Uh, One of the fun things about working on an animated film is that you have to invent a whole sonic world out of nothing, in a sense. And so you start from zero. You start talking with the director about who the characters are, what they go through in the course of the story, how we should feel about them, what their range of emotions are. And creature characters sometimes have the same, more or less, the same range of emotions that human characters do. Certainly the case with Toothless in this film. He is vicious sometimes. He's frightened sometimes. He sometimes needed to sound like a little puppy, sometimes like a leopard. Sometimes he's injured. And so it was up to me and the team of people who I work with to figure out how to create all those vocal sounds for this dragon. And so that's me as a sound designer. And some people might assume that the job of a sound designer is just literally to fabricate sounds, to figure out how to make the sounds. But really, in a grander sense, the job of the sound designer is to help the director figure out what the movie should sound like, what the sound style should be. Every movie has a sound style just like it has a visual style. And for How to Train Your Dragon, all the sounds needed to be convincing. They had to be naturalistic enough to so that you'd actually believe that these were dragons. And that brings up a problem, which is that you can't achieve that just by making dragon sounds with your mouth if you're a human.
Right.
You can augment, and I did augment a lot of the sound for Toothless and the other dragons by doing that kind of sound myself. But unless you are really lucky and you happen to make exactly the right kind of sound, it still sounds like a human. It doesn't sound like an animal. So the main way that we make vocalizations for all of these creatures is by going out in the real world and recording actual animals. For the dragons, we recorded camels, horses, dogs, leopards, tigers, bears, walrus. The list, goes on and on. And then the trick is to piece all of those together so that in a scene like the scene where Hiccup and Toothless get dropped into the cave, into this kind of warren of dragons in How to Train Your Dragon 2, you have to piece the Toothless vocalizations together so that it doesn't sound like you're going from a leopard to a horse to a puppy. It all has to sound like one creature, and that's where the technique comes in that I'm finally beginning to learn now after 35 years of doing this.
Right. A lot of people, just in case people don't realize this, you've had quite an impressive resume. You got your start working on Apocalypse Now, is that right?
Yeah.
and you've worked on The Right Stuff. You've worked on Indiana Jones films. You worked on Forrest Gump. You've won a couple of Academy Awards. Is at this point, you said that you're just now starting to learn things after 35 years of doing this. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I think you learn things every day, no matter how long you've been doing something. If you are really paying attention and looking and listening carefully, and you're still enthused about it, of course you're going to keep learning things. And I really honestly feel like I'm only now actually getting a little bit good at what I do. I think up until now it was mostly luck, but now I think
Yeah.
I've grasped some of the techniques a little better, so I feel more confident. But even now, when I begin working on a project, I have doubts about whether I'll be able to do it. Uh, just figure out how to make it all work. The producer and the director hire somebody like me because they think I already know exactly how to do whatever it is they want me to do. But of course, I know that I don't really know how I'm do the voice of Toothless, for instance, when I begin. I know that it's probably going to be a long process and it's going to involve a lot of experiments that don't work, but that will teach me things that I need to know about how it might work. And I think that's the attitude that you need to have, no matter how long you've been in the craft, whether you're just starting out or whether you've been doing it for 35 years.
Right. And with this one, you talked about creating things from scratch. Uh, Now, I think a lot of people, when they think of animated films, and particular with dialogue, for instance, I think there's an assumption that everything's just recorded like it was on a, a radio show with everyone in
Mhm.
the same room, uh, where the case is actually a lot of times they're recorded separately in different, rooms at different times. So I don't know if that's the case on this movie or not, but how do you link all those things together to make it seem like it's of the same scene? You know what I mean? Like it's
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. In American style animation and the style that's mostly done in Europe, you do start with what's essentially a radio play. The the directors, the other filmmakers who are working on the animated film obviously have a pretty good idea of what the story is going to be and who the characters are, but very often uh, the specifics of each scene have yet to be worked out. So they bring some actors in, they have some dialogue lines already written, they often encourage the actors to improvise to try to figure out what these characters might be like, and they record that essentially like you would have recorded a radio play 50 years ago when those were popular, and that helps them. That's a good first step in terms of figuring out whether a scene is going to work or not, whether there is emotion in the scene or whether you feel like the characters are developing in the scene. And so if they think that the scene has some promise based on that initial audio recording, then they will go ahead and start doing more elaborate storyboards, and more elaborate visuals in general for the scene. And then they send that to me, the sound person, and now it's no longer just a kind of description of what's supposed to happen, which may have been the first thing that I heard about a scene. I actually can see moving visual images, though often they're very crude, but that then will inspire me to do more specific kinds of sound effects and design for the sequence. And so I send them back speculative sounds more or less in sync with those crude visual images that I see. And then that gives the animators more ideas, those sounds, give them more specific ideas about what the dragons in this case could look like. So it's that kind of continuing feedback process that allows all of us to gradually develop a scene until it really plays the way it needs to.
right. And at what point do you know? Do you ever really know that you've got it done. You know that this is the way that it should sound. Is there ever that point in your work?
Well, I've taught myself to be able to abandon the work at a certain point because you have to. You know, the movie has to come out on a certain date, and so you can't keep revising things forever. But I would say every scene that I've ever worked on, when I look at it a year later, or a few months later, or maybe many years later, I think, wow, if I'd only done so and so, it would have been even better. But you got to move on.
Right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us, and congratulations on the film.
Thanks so much. It was my pleasure. Bye bye.